All right, organizational behavior exam coming up. Let's get you ready to pass. This is your deep dive into the absolute essentials: perception, decisions, and emotions. Stick with me, and you'll have a rock-solid grip on this section.
So here's our game plan, and it's all structured for maximum recall. We're going to kick things off with how you perceive reality. Then we'll dive into the common traps your perception can fall into. After that, we'll look at decision-making shortcuts and errors, and we'll wrap up with the huge role emotions play at work.
Okay, first up, how you perceive reality. Let's get into the basic building blocks of how we all make judgments.
So what exactly is perception? Well, it's the process we use to organize and make sense of all the information coming at us, just to give our world some meaning. But here's the absolute key takeaway for your exam. You act based on your perception of reality, not reality itself. Everything gets filtered through your own unique lens.
So if we're all acting based on our own perceptions, how do we make sense of what other people are doing? That's where attribution theory comes in. Think of it as the mental framework we use to figure out why people do what they do.
So when we're judging someone's behavior, we basically take one of two paths. We either blame it on something internal, their personality, their ability, their effort, or we blame it on something external, like the situation or just plain bad luck. So how do we decide? We look for three clues: consistency, distinctiveness, and consensus. For instance, if your coworker is always late for every type of meeting and no one else is, well, that's high consistency but low distinctiveness and consensus. You're probably going to make an internal attribution.
And here's a classic example to lock this in. Your colleague shows up late. An internal attribution sounds like, ugh, they're so lazy. An external one sounds more like, the train must be delayed again. You see? Same event, but your judgment creates two totally different realities.
Okay, section 2, common perception traps. Now that we know how perception works, let's talk about the shortcuts that get us in trouble. These are the common errors that can lead you astray, and trust me, they are always on the exam.
Here is the lineup of the usual suspects. You've got the fundamental attribution error, self-serving bias, the halo effect, the list goes on. You need to know these exist, but we're going to zoom in on a couple of the biggest troublemakers right now. First up, the big one, the fundamental attribution error. This is our default setting to overestimate personal factors and just completely underestimate situational factors when we're judging other people. So when someone else messes up, our first instinct is to blame them, not their circumstances. It's a fundamental flaw in how we see others.
Next is the halo effect. This is what happens when we let one single positive thing about a person create this halo that makes us see everything else they do in a positive light. We see one good thing, and suddenly we assume everything about them must be great, and it totally clouds our judgment.
I mean, think about a job interview. A candidate walks in super confident, super charismatic. That creates a powerful halo. And because of that halo, the interviewer might hear their answers and think they're way more brilliant than they actually are. That confidence just bleeds over and colors everything else.
Now, these perception traps, they don't just stay in our heads. Nope. They directly impact our choices. And that brings us perfectly to section 3, decision-making shortcuts and errors. This is all about how we really make choices. So, in a perfect world, we'd all use the rational model for making decisions. We'd have all the info, we'd logically weigh every single opt-in, and we'd pick the absolute best one. But we don't live in a perfect world. The reality is something called bounded rationality. We have limited time, limited information, and limited brain power. So we don't optimize, we satisfy, which means we just choose an option that's good enough to solve the problem and move on. And because we're taking these mental shortcuts to satisfy us, our brains fall into some pretty predictable traps or biases. You can see a list of the big ones right here. Let's break down 2 that are absolutely critical to know. First, there's the availability bias. This is our brain's tendency to judge how likely something is based purely on how easily an example pops into our head. So if you just saw a dramatic news story about a plane crash, you're going to think plane crashes are much more common than they actually are. That vivid, recent memory is more available, and it totally skews your judgment.
And this one is a huge deal in business. Escalation of commitment. You might also see it on your exam called the sunk cost fallacy. This is that dangerous tendency to keep pouring time, money, and effort into a failing project simply because you've already invested so much. It's that feeling of, well, I can't back out now. And so you just keep digging the hole deeper.
For our final section, we're shifting gears from the cognitive to the emotional, right? Perception and decisions can feel pretty logical, but what about feelings? Well, at work, emotions aren't just random noise. They are critical data that drive our actions.
The core idea here is called affective events theory, or AET, and it's actually pretty simple. It says that stuff happens at work. You get a compliment from your boss, or you get a frustrating email, and these little events trigger emotional reactions. Those emotions then have a direct impact on your job performance and how satisfied you are with your job. It connects the day-to-day to the big picture. Now, sometimes the emotions your job requires you to show on the outside don't match what you're actually feeling on the inside. That gap, that's the core of what we call emotional labor. It's the difference between your real felt emotions and the displayed emotions you have to put on for the job. And there are two main ways people manage this gap. You can do surface acting, which is basically faking it. You're smiling at the customer, but inside you're totally frustrated. As you can imagine, that's incredibly stressful. The other way is deep acting, where you try to genuinely change your internal feelings to match what you're supposed to be showing. It might feel more authentic, but man, is it emotionally draining. Okay, we have blitzed through the core theories here. To really master this stuff for your exam, you need to practice applying it. You can find the full, in-depth summary and a bunch of practice tests over at gradeguru.nl. So let's do a rapid-fire recap of the absolute must-knows. Number 1, you act on your perception of reality, which is full of biases like the fundamental attribution error and the halo effect. Number 2, in the real world, we use bounded rationality. We satisfize, we don't optimize. Number 3, our mental shortcuts or heuristics lead to predictable errors like the availability bias. And finally, number 4, emotional labor, that difference between surface and deep acting, is a massive part of many jobs and it really impacts employee well-being. You got this.